We're back! Welcome to the second season of You're All Doomed, the podcast that dismembers Friday the 13th movies into 13-minute chunks. I'm Vivid Dreamer Greg.
And I'm still just Brian.
And this segment of the movie opens with the Paramount logo, just like the last time, and ends right in the middle of the credits. So as soon as the Paramount logo fades, we're presented with a film by Steve Miner. And then the first shot of the movie proper is a tidy little neighborhood with a spooky-looking house at one end.
Yeah, that is not a house that I would visit if I lived in that neighborhood.
No, it looked super creepy. And I wonder if they're establishing that as a house that we'll be spending time in, or it's a little bit fuzzy on the layout of this neighborhood. But,
yeah.
We are then presented with the legs of a child.
Yeah, we see him from the knees down, and he's just like walking through the puddles and stomping around and having a good time. And he's singing a song, and it's the Itsy Bitsy Spider song.
Yeah, a little popular nursery rhyme. My favorite uses of that song are actually on The Simpsons. Bart at one point is singing a little medley of nursery rhymes, and he starts off with the Itsy Bitsy Spider went up the water spout, yeah. It's a jazzy little tune, and Aunt Patty and Aunt Selma are like, love that spider medley.
Got a little trivia about the Itsy Bitsy Spider song.
Okay.
It's known as the Incy Wincy Spider in Australia and the UK. The premise of, well, I can just read the lyrics to the nursery rhyme, but it's the Itsy Bitsy Spider climbed up the water spout. Down came the rain and washed the spider out. Out came the sun and dried up all the rain. And the Itsy Bitsy Spider climbed up the spout again. There's really no point to it. It's kind of repetitive. It just... it's this endless cycle of this spider trying to go up the spout. Sisyphean
task of this poor little spider trying to climb up the...
So it's an odd little nursery rhyme, but it's actually, in popular culture, it's got a pretty big presence. It was recorded by everyone from Carly Simon to Nicole Kidman in the movie Dead Calm. Little Richard did a version of it. And most recently, Jamie Foxx's character Electro sang it in The Amazing Spider-Man 2.
Oh, that's interesting, because Willem Dafoe did a little version of it in the first Sam Raimi Spider-Man movie.
Well, I guess there's only so many Spider-Man
good point.
songs.
It's thematically appropriate. Like 2 days after I watched this segment of the movie, we were watching an episode of Brooklyn Nine-Nine, and that song featured heavily in the episode. It was like, oh my God, I'm hearing it again. I haven't heard that
crazy.
song.
Now I'm just going to hear it everywhere.
So this kid, first of all, this kid is just, splashing around in puddles and stuff, wearing regular pants and sneakers. There's no like galoshes or anything. So I have a feeling this kid's going to get smacked when he gets home.
Yeah.
Like, what the hell were you thinking walking around? And then I get the sense, I think that the kid's name is Jesse.
Yeah.
So we don't know for sure whether it's a boy or a girl.
Oh, I never thought about that. But I just figured it was a boy.
That splashing in puddles seems like kind of a boyish thing to do. I don't know. Might be gender
girls
specific.
Girls are allowed to splash in puddles too.
No,
right?
girls are not allowed to splash in puddles.
Okay.
That's not feminine enough.
Okay.
My first thought was that it was a girl, actually. So when you said boy a minute ago, I'm like, oh yeah, I guess it could be a boy.
Nice. Okay. No, I just always assumed it was a boy.
Creative differences on the podcast already.
Yeah. This podcast is over.
So then, Jesse's mom calls Jesse inside. It's time to come in to go to bed, and Jesse, oh, Mom, and steps off camera, and immediately a sinister pair of baggy pants and heavy boots splashes into that same puddle. So this person must have been standing right next to Jesse the whole time.
I feel like this person was, like, getting a piggyback ride from Jesse, because there's absolutely no way that he or she would have seen this person. Jesse steps off screen, and the ripples from the puddle that he just departed are still kind of flickering when this other person shows up. It's just instantaneous. It's like, okay, how did you not see this person?
Yeah, that was a bit rushed. There was a scene in Empire Strikes Back where Darth Vader turns to General Veers, and General Veers is like standing right up his ass, and it's the same kind of thing, and it cracks me up every time I see it. We've got the baggy pants and the boots, and kind of a menacing, plodding gait as this baggy pants person walks down the street. And right off the bat, we get the infamous musical motif of So something's up.
Yeah, I mean, because when we left off the first movie, we know Mrs. Voorhees is dead. There's no question about that, and she was the main instigator of the movie, and this is a sequel to the movie. We don't know exactly where we are yet, but I have no idea who this person could be. Are we supposed to think that it's Mrs. Voorhees coming back from the grave, or is it just someone stomping around the neighborhood? Yeah, it's not really clear yet, but the music cue is an indication that something bad is about to happen.
Right. It's the same kind of killer theme that we got in the first movie, so this is obviously bad news. But then we cut inside a house, presumably the spooky house at the end of the street, and we see a familiar face resting on a bed. It's Alice, who was the surviving cast member from the first movie, and she's sleeping wearing a really horrid outfit.
She's fully dressed.
She's fully dressed,
sleeping on a bed in a room that has every single light on.
Yeah, I mean, maybe she was just taking a quick lie down and then fell asleep, but she's in her her sweater and gingham overalls and starts thrashing around on the bed, having nightmare flashbacks.
Erotic dream. Oh, nightmare.
Oh,
yeah. Sorry.
And
again, we see it differently.
We see it differently. Fair enough. But we basically then get about 5 minutes of screen time that are primarily flashbacks of footage from the first movie. So it recaps the whole story.
Yeah, and I'm wondering how necessary that is. Now, obviously, we're dealing with a time when you can't just readily access a movie and revisit it easily.
Right. They didn't have home video it was not as prevalent, that kind of thing. Yeah, that's true.
So, but I just don't know how necessary it is. Like, how many people are going to walk into a Friday the 13th Part 2 viewing and not have an understanding of what happened in Part 1?
Yeah, that's a fair question. I mean, I feel like this was sort of early in the days of sequels, where nowadays virtually every movie that you go to is a sequel to something. This was, kind of on the front edge of that. There hadn't been a ton of sequels. But, I mean, it could have also just been an easy way to chew up some screen time that, instead of filming a whole separate expository scene of her talking to a therapist or something, the cheapest way for them was just to reuse old footage and get to that 91-minute mark or whatever they were trying to aim for.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just imagining, not to make another Star Wars reference, but can you imagine if Empire Strikes Back had a 5-minute montage at the beginning that recapped A New Hope? And for those of you just joining us,
yeah, I see what you're saying, and I mean, frankly, this was a little bit of a chore of a segment to sit through because so much of it was footage that we had just talked about for this first season. So I don't know, were there any flashbacks that particularly jumped out at you as interesting?
No. It basically just focuses on like the exchange that Alice has with Mrs. Voorhees, and cutting back and forth to Jason drowning, and but the one of the peculiar things that I found about this flashback is that Alice is seeing footage of the movie that we saw. She's seeing perspectives that she wouldn't normally have access to. She wasn't there to see Jason drowning, so how does she know what Jason looked like when she drowned?
Yeah, it's like when Mrs. Brody is having, in Jaws the Revenge, she's having flashbacks of Chief Brody shooting the shark in the first movie. She wasn't even there.
Right. It just happens to be footage from the original movie, and we're supposed to believe that this is what her nightmare erotic dream is about. So yeah, that was my biggest question, is why is her dream from the POV of the audience of the first movie? If you're going to do, like, again, it's a different time, sequels were a relatively new thing, but I'm wondering if it would have been more fun. Like, if you're going to insist on refreshing the audience's memory about what happened in the first one, why not recreate it and just come up with like a different approach, so you're not seeing the same exact footage again, but maybe just like shoot it, the same exact thing, but just from different angles and from a perspective of someone else, and just make it seem a little unique, but still remind people what happened in the first movie.
Yeah, like how Back to the Future 2 reshot the end of Back to the Future 1 because of Elizabeth Shue not being in the first movie. Yeah, I mean, again, I think budget limitations and maybe even actor availability or something, maybe that just wasn't even an option for this movie. But yes, it would have been more interesting to see these events from Alice's perspective, perhaps. One thing about the flashback sequence that I always did appreciate was that I actually saw this movie before I had ever seen part one, so this kind of gave me the whole story. And I always that was part of the reason that growing up I wasn't as big a fan of part one, because I already knew everything that happened from the flashbacks. So, this time it worked the other way, where it felt redundant because I had just seen part one. It used to be that part one felt redundant because I had always seen the flashbacks at the beginning of part two.
I have no evidence to support this, but I believe that part two was my entry point into this franchise. It was probably the one that was on at the time that I would have been interested in a movie like this. And so, it was playing on the movie channel or HBO or something, and I started watching it. And yeah, you probably had a very similar experience to what I did, which is watching part one later. I don't know if I would have followed up part two immediately with part one, but I know eventually I got to part one, and I know for a fact that part one was not the first one I watched. So from that standpoint, I can see why the flashback was maybe necessary. Maybe there was a lot of people that didn't see the first movie, and now there's, after the buzz from the first one, they want to see the second one, but didn't have access to the first one because it's not on VHS or whatever. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, well, here you go. We're going to just refresh your memory really quick, and now you're up to speed, and then, then we'll dive into the new stuff. Alice wakes up from her erotic dream or nightmare. And this is like our first clear look at her. And she doesn't look all that different from how she looked from the first movie. Her hair is maybe a little bit longer, but, we can presume that not too much time has passed since we last saw her.
Yeah, it's immediately unclear how much time has passed, but you're right. She looks, it's not like she's suddenly much older or something. So it's got to be a relatively short amount of time. There is something interesting about her look in this movie. She doesn't seem as tough looking, or I don't know. She looks more frightened, or I guess maybe that's an acting choice where she's lived through this terrible set of circumstances, and so maybe she is much more timid, or something. But
could it be the green corduroy overalls she's wearing?
Perhaps that might have something to do with it.
It kind of makes it difficult to look tough when you're wearing something like that.
You're making it work right now just fine.
But yeah, I know what you mean. She we suspect she's alone in the house, and maybe that makes her seem a little bit more vulnerable than she was. Like maybe the outdoors is more her element.
But like you pointed out, if she's sleeping with the lights on and she is alone in this house, which you can presume by the fact that no one is coming to see if she's okay or anything.
Yep.
Maybe she is just kind of, these days a lot more frightened and suffering from some post-traumatic stress.
Yeah, which is understandable considering what she went through.
Or she's terrified by the decoration of her own bathroom, because that is the butt ugliest room I've seen in a long time.
Yeah.
It's like white tile walls with a really like salmon pink shower curtain.
Oh, that thing is hideous.
And a weird leaf foliage pattern on part of the wall, and then she's got a yellow fuzzy toilet lid cover, which I never understood the point of those things, because you don't sit on the lid, so why does it need to be carpeted? And it just seems like a magnet for any sort of bacteria that's floating around in the bathroom.
Yeah, I've never understood those either. I know that my toilet seat at home, or I should say like the toilet lid at home, can't support my weight. It's just kind of like flimsy plastic, so if I sit on it, it's like sitting on a Tupperware lid. So having a little carpet on it doesn't make it any more comfortable.
Right. And theoretically you'd be wearing, you wouldn't want to sit on a carpeted toilet lid with no pants on, because then you're going to have to wash that thing all the time. But if you've got pants on, what's the point of it being carpeted at all to begin with?
True. Yeah.
It feels like a very kind of late 70s, early 80s thing. I think my mom's powder room had
Everybody
one of those.
Had those things. Yeah. So while Alice is in her hideously decorated bathroom. She goes to the sink and washes her face, because apparently that's what everybody does in a movie when they just need to snap out of, their nap, or, some, horrible dream they were having. I don't know if I've ever washed my face in a sink for that purpose.
That's a really good point. It's such a common trope, but yeah, I don't splash cold water on my face unless I've just come in from like mowing the lawn.
Right.
Or
Like unless I
something.
need to wash my face, but I've never used it as a tactic to calm myself down, or to kind of collect my, my balance or anything. It's just purely like I just wash my face because it's dirty.
Maybe I'll start doing that instead of paying $150 every 2 weeks to go to a therapist. I'll just splash some
Why
water on
not?
my face and I'll feel better.
There, I'm all set.
Heck.
So while she's in the bathroom, the phone rings, and it's Alice's mother on the other end.
From California, perhaps.
Yeah, I guess so.
Alice doesn't seem super happy to be hearing from Mom. She seems like, oh, hi, Mom. It seems almost like Mom maybe calls a lot.
Yeah, like she's checking up on her. Alice says something along the lines of, she apologizes for not calling earlier, but she fell asleep. And again, it's nighttime. She was laying on the bed, fully dressed with all the lights on. Like, what did she think was going to happen? Of course she's going to fall. Or, I mean, she's not. I wouldn't fall asleep with all the lights on, fully dressed. But why else did she go up to her bedroom and lay on her bed?
Good point.
So it's not like she accidentally fell asleep in the chair while she was, watching Wheel of Fortune or something. It just, like, she deliberately went upstairs.
I mean, I think that's you're absolutely right, but I think from a story point of view, they did that because they want Alice to feel disoriented. So having her awake from an unexpected slumber keeps her kind of off balance for this part of the movie.
But she just washed her face in the sink.
True, so she should have snapped right out of it.
Right.
But that had to be at night, because if it was noon and the sun was blazing in the windows, it wouldn't be creepy at all.
Plus, it'd be so early on the West Coast.
Yeah, good point. Mom would be, just getting out of bed. So, I mean, I kind of see why they had to do it this way, but it is a little bit clunky.
No, I know. It's just, I feel like they're just adding, like, they needed a reason to show the flashback. They're like, well, let's just have her sleeping. But then we need Alice doing something. Well, then she'll wake up and she'll explain why she was sleeping on the phone. And it's fine.
It's a little clunky.
Yeah.
Mom is obviously kind of nagging her about, maybe the fact that she hasn't flown to California to stay with them or something, because we're only hearing Alice's side of the conversation. But she says that this is the only way she knows how to deal with whatever she's dealing with. And I'm curious, like, the only way she knows how is to sit around in an ugly house that we aren't positive is hers. Like, is she renting this place? Was it, did she go home after the events of the first movie, and this is where she has just kind of gone into seclusion? Or it seems like a very odd approach to deal with whatever she's trying to work through.
Yeah, we have no idea where she is. We also don't really know what Alice does for a living. And I mean, from what we've seen of the house, it's pretty nice. It looks like an old Victorian house, and there's tons of furniture in there. So it's not like she's living in some, little, one bedroom apartment with, a futon. Like, she's doing really well for herself, but she does say something to her mom on the phone that she's doing fine. She just needs, some time alone. But you're right. It's like, she's got this giant house, and is this really the best tactic? Because we know what she went through. We don't know what she's gone through since then, but it just doesn't seem like being alone in this giant house is really sensible. And maybe that's why the mom is calling, like, hey, we don't agree with what you're doing here.
We don't
Why
think
don't
this
you
is healthy, Alice?
Yeah, come stay with us, or let us come visit you. Or but Alice apparently has this plan, and she's implementing it, and whether or not it's working, we don't know, but she's
sticking
jumpy
to her
and
guns,
disturbed,
so
and
good for her.
Yeah, so she's just going to fight through it.
There's some evidence that perhaps she's undergoing some art therapy. We know that she was an artist from her sketches in the first movie, and we see some of her sketches here. Unfortunately, they kind of look like Janine's concepts for Spinal Tap as zodiac animals when they're trying to decide what to do on their next tour, because they're pretty horrid. I mean, I think they're supposed to be kind of frightening portraits of these images that Alice is having to see in her own mind, but it's not gothic enough. I would think that she would maybe be obsessed with like drawing gruesome, photos of terrible injuries and like, I don't know, and embracing more of a dark side maybe or something, if that's what they were going for. These are kind of weird representations.
Yeah, I mean, I saw it kind of in the same way. They're kind of like abstract self-portraits in a way. And one of them looks like, I mean, it was red, so I'm just jumping to a conclusion here, but it looked like they had kind of like blood on their face. And so, yeah, like maybe she is trying to kind of, vent some of her, anger and fear in these drawings, but they're not like blatantly disturbing, but there's just something a little off about them.
They aren't bright and cheerful, sketches by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah.
We then get into a section where it's one of their first kind of cheats. Alice hops in the shower, she only takes a shower for 15 seconds. I timed it, and I mean, that's ridiculous. She barely even had time to get wet.
Yeah.
But the camera kind of tracks down the hall and into the bathroom and creeps up to the shower curtain, presenting the image as though it's someone doing that in the movie. But Alice, in kind of a jump scare, pulls the curtain aside and is staring right at the camera, and there's nothing there. So it's just sort of like a cheap way of introducing some false peril that there are a couple more instances of that in this movie. A little bit of a weak sauce approach.
Yeah, I did have a problem with that too, because it is like, I don't mind when horror movies come up with unique ways of presenting threats, but there has to be some sort of payoff to it. You can't just cheat us into thinking that someone is actually lurking down the hall, showing us like something that we have not yet seen in this movie. It's very similar to something that we saw in the first movie, which is like that first person, lurking point of view. And then we're like, oh, we're going back to that. But every time we saw that in part one, it really was someone watching them.
Right.
There was no evidence to think that it was just a cameraman hiding behind a tree. Like, no, it's we know now it was Mrs. Voorhees hiding behind the tree. But yeah, so this was a little bit of a cheat. And so when it was revealed and she, pulls the curtain back and she's just staring back directly at us at the camera, I was just kind of like, that's kind of stupid. And it wasn't scary. It didn't even last long enough for you to really like build any tension. Like the walk down the hall took like 3 or 4 seconds, and they pull the thing back and there's nothing there. So yeah, it was a little bit of it's not a great start.
No. And I mean, it underscores Alice's, paranoia, but I think they could have done that in a different way if they had shown her in the shower. I mean, they don't need to, show below her shoulders if, like if the actress didn't want to be naked, that's fine, but show Alice in the shower and show her getting freaked out by not being able to see on the other side of the shower curtain, and maybe she sees a shadow or something and thinks it's someone. Like they did this from the opposite angle, and it was more about scaring the audience unnecessarily than showing what the character was going through.
Yeah, I agree. If they'd done it from the other angle, like from inside the shower, and you think you see someone walk by, and then she pulls the camera back and there's nothing there, that's cool. That's a cool tactic. But yeah, just tricking us with a POV shot was not the way to go.
Yeah. Then she gets a second phone call. The person hangs up, so it's basically just a prank call. Are we supposed to believe that that's Baggy Pants calling? And if so, is there a payphone nearby? Does Baggy Pants have cell phones didn't exist then, so how would Baggy Pants know the telephone number? So was this just a coincidental prank call? Like I wasn't quite sure what they were going for with that either.
Probably is supposed to be Baggy Pants, but when you stop to think about it, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I think it's just because, hey, remember that spooky person that we showed you standing outside the house a couple of minutes ago? And then remember Alice from part one? Well, the phone just rang and someone hung up. So put 2 and 2 together. But if you stop to analyze it too much, it doesn't make a lot of sense. But yeah, like, are they next door? Is it what's the other horror movie when a stranger calls or something and they were upstairs the whole time?
Right.
Or maybe they got a second line like you did when you were a kid.
Yeah, right. When I had my sister's lines.
But yeah, it doesn't really add up.
It doesn't really hold up when you think about what we learned about baggy pants later, where baggy pants would have even learned to use a telephone. But okay, we'll get there.
There's one thing I noticed when she was walking to the phone. There was a poster hanging on the wall at the end of the hallway, and I wish you could have been with me when I started to do research to figure out what this poster was, because I found the solution so quickly that I was so proud of myself. But the poster hanging on the wall, it says it's for it's like a framed poster, and there's a picture of like an old Victorian bicycle on there, and it's for the 1899 and I don't speak French, but La Ascertain Metropole Veleda Model 207. So I looked it up to figure out what this was. It's a chainless bike that had a somewhat, although not really documented, checkered history. I think chainless bikes were kind of a big deal back then, or like a new thing back then. And
this is like late 19th century.
Oh yeah, like 1899, I think it was. So it was like this new technology, and it was a big deal. But the poster features the Germanic priestess Velada, who, like Boadicea in England, was a legendary leader of an uprising against the Romans, which I thought was kind of cool. And the significance of the imagery is that this priestess is shown throwing off her chains. You know, like, I'm free. You don't need these chains anymore. So it's an interesting poster, and we've never seen, as far as I know, we've never seen Alice riding a bike, but it seems like she might be someone that's interested in bicycling.
I mean, that's an interesting piece of set design, because given how kind of liberated and self-sufficient Alice has proven to be from the events of the first movie, it's sort of maybe an early feminist image, or, you know, liberation icon.
I never thought about that.
So that's kind of a, you know, I hope that was a deliberate choice on the
Alice
set designer's
is throwing
part.
Off the chains. She's no longer restricted.
Yeah.
She's free. Yeah, we could very well be reading into it too much, but yeah, you have to wonder why that poster was there, because it's in a pretty prominent place. She goes up and down that hallway a few times in this scene, and that's the only reason why I looked it up, was because I felt like they were kind of drawing attention to it, but this was not something that would have been easy to dig up information on.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder how many art historians are watching Friday the 13th Part 2, you know, at least repeated, you know, enough times to have noticed this detail.
Yeah, but you can still buy the poster if you know what to look for. You can like dig it up, and you can find it on eBay and stuff like that.
I'm going to decorate my house exactly the way she decorates hers, bathroom and all. So, having freshly emerged from the shower, she's now wearing kind of a robe, like a kind of a thin silk robe, and she goes into the kitchen. But she's still feeling unsettled. The prank phone call has definitely got her on edge, and as she goes into the kitchen, she actually picks up a defensive weapon, and it's just an ice pick, which I thought was a little bit odd. Given what Alice has been through, I'm a little surprised that she doesn't have a stockpile of weapons all over the place.
True, yeah.
Even, you know, on her body at all times. But that just seems like kind of a lame weapon. You know, what are you just going to poke somebody if they come at you?
Well, I mean, I
better
remember
than nothing. But
yeah, she grabbed a fork in part 1 when she was trying to fend off Mrs. Voorhees, so maybe she's just not very educated.
She's consistent in her poor weapon choices.
Right. But you're right. Why wouldn't she have like a shotgun or something, handy, if she's really that scared? And she's clearly agitated by all these things going on, and this is just what we're witnessing, and who knows what's been going on, before this. But yeah, it is an odd thing to just pick up and be like, oh, this is gonna keep me safe.
And of all the things in the kitchen, instead of the ice pick, I would have chosen the foul looking watermelon that's on top of the fridge, and you could just bonk someone over the head with it. That would probably have more of an effect than the ice pick. And we'll come back to that watermelon in a moment, but then there's something draws her attention over by the window. So Alice goes over for a closer look, and we get the first jumping cat scare. of the series.
Yeah, I wonder what movie had the first, cat jump scare. Was it this one? Because it's so tired. You want to talk about, tropes that are just, driven into the ground. This is one where you're led to believe that, something is going to jump out and get you. And then, oh no, it's just the cat though. Oh, ha, ha, ha.
It's the first time I ever saw the jumping cat scare, but I feel like even then I was like, well, that's just stupid.
Yeah.
And it's even more amusing if you watch this in slow motion, because clearly the cat is not voluntarily jumping through the window. That cat has been hurled by a stagehand through the window.
When we say jump through the window, we mean thrown through the window. Yeah, there's no disclaimer, or maybe there is, but I don't remember seeing a disclaimer saying that no animals were harmed filming this movie, but that cat lost one of its lives there.
Yeah, and hopefully it wasn't like a 50-take shot like, Stanley Kubrick was shooting this scene. They would have hurled that cat through the window 800 times.
Just real quick, going back to Alice's choice of weapons, one thing I noticed too is as she's walking toward the window before the cat jumps out, she's holding the ice pick like a hammer. She's not holding it in like a stabbing, motion.
Right.
She's holding it by the handle, and the pointy, sharp end is sticking straight up, like she's just gonna like bonk someone on the head with it. She's doomed. Like there's no way she's ever gonna be able to fight someone off if it's anything but a cat.
Yeah, very bad choice all around. At first I wondered if this is even her cat, but then we see that there is a bowl on the table and.
Yeah, I mean, if I did not own a cat and a cat jumped through the window, I think that would scare me just as much as, someone walking through the door with a chainsaw. So yeah, I never really thought that it was anything but her cat, but yeah, she's definitely relieved when the cat does jump through the window, and she does what most people do after a scare like that. She puts a kettle on the stove.
Yeah, which I rolled my eyes because I'm like, we've seen her make beverages for like 20 minutes in the last movie. I don't want to go through that again. Even if she needs to soothe her nerves after her asshole cat has just scared her, it's like, can't you just get a shot of whiskey or something? Why do we have to go through the whole heating up water, pouring blah, blah, blah?
Maybe that was one of her script notes. Like, I believe Alice just likes to make beverages.
She likes warm beverages.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, fine, fair enough. But she goes over to the fridge to, get some stuff to put in her drink, and opens the fridge door, and apparently the watermelon has been removed from the fridge because now there's room for a human head.
Yeah, I mean, there's other stuff in the fridge
There's
as well.
quite a lot of other stuff in the fridge.
From what I could see, there was a bottle of V8.
A huge thing of V8.
Yeah, that thing's going to last a while. By the way, V8 is disgusting and no one should ever drink it.
One of our sponsors will not be V8.
Tomato juice is just terrible. There's a bottle of apple juice. There's two bottles of Coke or Pepsi. You can't really tell. There's a quart of vitamin D milk and a gallon of milk.
Farm fresh.
Yeah, she likes her milk. There's a mostly empty bottle of 7 Seas Italian dressing. There's a bag of bagels.
Split personality, no hinge bagels. Which, again, I wonder if that's some sort of
it could be
intentional set dressing.
Yeah, and there's a ceramic yellow dish containing some sort of leftovers. I don't know. It's probably like a tuna noodle casserole or something. And the aforementioned severed head.
Severed head. It looks like we're seeing Pamela Voorhees' head in the fridge, and it's a damn nice looking prop.
Yeah. Well, who says it's a prop?
Good point. Well, except that we know that the actress who played Pamela Voorhees was at the time still alive. So
okay. Way to ruin it. But yeah, it does. It looks really good.
Yeah.
And it's that's a legitimate scare. We finally have a legitimate scare. You open up the refrigerator and there's a head on the shelf. Yeah, I'm going to shit my pants.
Yeah, now I understand. Yeah. Now there's going to be shit on the floor.
Now grab the ice pick. Now you've justified the use of the ice pick.
Yeah, I mean, my favorite detail about that head is that even the teeth are a little bit bloody. So the special effects team did a bang up job with that. It's top notch. And they show it a couple times, so you get a pretty good look at it. But yeah, obviously Alice freaks the fuck out.
I mean, this kind of rules out one potential suspect. We've seen the baggy pants and the boots walking down the street. Okay, could it potentially be Mrs. Voorhees? We know we saw her head get cut off, but these are horror movies. Maybe she's come back from the dead. It's safe to say that unless this baggy pants person is walking around without a head, that is not Mrs. Voorhees. But someone put that head there and had access to the house. And, I don't know how often Alice goes in the refrigerator, but I don't think it's been sitting there for a long time.
Right. Right.
So it's a new development, maybe like when she was in the shower or something. But she's freaking out.
I wonder if she recognizes who it is.
That's a good point.
I mean, she doesn't have a whole lot of time because of what happens next. But I mean, I wonder if there's any part of her aside from just the instinctive horror of seeing a human head in your fridge, if she realizes, oh my God, that's the woman I decapitated. That's the head that I separated from its body.
Because it's in pretty bad shape. I mean, this is not a freshly severed head. This is something that's been rotting for a little bit, but it still bears
recognizable. It's
absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like it's just skull and sinew. I mean, it still looks like a person. So,
and I'm pretty sure she was able to connect the dots pretty quickly. She's had some experience with decapitation, so if she sees a head in her fridge, I think she's going to figure out. She's going to make the connection of like, oh my God, this is Pamela Voorhees.
Right. But she doesn't have a whole lot of time because almost immediately she's grabbed from behind, and the ice pick that she had previously been wielding in self-defense is driven through her temple.
That's a tough way to go.
That's pretty brutal.
Because I have a feeling, and I don't have a lot of experience with this, but I do have a feeling that would be a pretty slow death. I don't feel like it wouldn't be like a bullet going through the head where it'd probably terminate things pretty quickly. I feel like it's going to take some time for that ice pick to
You're going to feel it going in.
Yeah, you're going to feel it going in, and it's going to wait. It has to go pretty deep before it really starts to shut down, central nervous systems and things like that. Probably it would be my top 10 ways that I would not want to die.
Yeah, it was a really well done effect. I mean, apparently they kind of botched it the first couple attempts. But it was a really convincing effect. I kind of wonder what Baggy Pants' plan was if she hadn't had the ice pick handy. Obviously Baggy Pants entered the house with the intent of putting the head in the fridge. Baggy Pants then presumably also intended to kill Alice all along. But if that ice pick hadn't been on the counter, or Alice hadn't kind of drawn attention to it, what was Baggy Pants' plan going to be instead?
Well, I mean, if Baggy Pants is who I think it is, the busboy, then he probably has like a broom with him at least.
Like a wet mop that he would shove in her
could
face.
break the handle off and stab her with that. But
Okay.
but it is a good point that if your intention is to infiltrate someone's house, put a severed head on the shelf of the fridge, and then the end result to kill the person in the house, you've kind of forgotten one key element, which is the weapon. So yeah, I wonder what the backup plan would have been if that ice pick hadn't been around.
I'm with you. I think there's still an entire kind of cinematic universe spin-off series featuring the busboy. I think you're onto something, and I know that the series is having trouble at the moment using many of the established characters because of a lawsuit, but I think probably the busboy is fair game.
I agree.
One quick detail, it cuts back to the cat, who seems remarkably unperturbed by all of this. I kind of feel like the cat was in on it.
Possibly.
Or at least is not at all sad to see its owner being murdered.
Yeah, like finally.
Yeah.
But we also know that the baggy pants person is very courteous because they take the kettle, the screaming kettle, off the stove.
Yeah, I thought that was that was very thoughtful of Baggy Pants to and at least he didn't pour himself a cup of hot
Nescafe.
water and, Nescafe.
Is there a purpose to taking the kettle off the stove? I mean, the noise was getting pretty annoying for me, so I don't know if it was just to alleviate that, because the screaming kettle kind of elevates the tension of the scene, but then this person removes it from the kettle. Is it because that could potentially alert the neighbors if it's going on too long?
That's what I'm thinking.
Okay.
There's a line not to jump ahead, but there's a line later on in the movie that makes me think that's exactly what is going on there, is that Baggy Pants doesn't want any undue attention until, a substantial amount of time has passed. But yeah, just there was something kind of tidy and good housekeeping about that little moment. It always cracks me up, especially given where Baggy Pants goes on as a character, for years afterward. So we say goodbye to Adrienne King. Alice is now dead, which is a shame. We spent a lot of time invested in her surviving the first movie, and she's not unceremoniously, but rather quickly murdered off in the sequel, the first 11 minutes or so of the sequel. But surprisingly, for me, it works here. And that doesn't bother me. By contrast, one of the most frustrating and disappointing movie experiences I've ever had was Alien 3, where they kill off Hicks and Newt during the opening credits after we've just been so invested in them surviving the previous movie with Ripley, and they're just so casually disposed of that, I hated that movie. No offense to anyone who worked on it, but I hated that movie right off the bat because of what they did to the characters. So for some reason, this strikes me differently, and I find it kind of satisfying.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with it either. The one thing that we can conclude from what has happened, though, is that this was an act of revenge from Baggy Pants. Alice was clearly targeted, and this person knows that they were Alice was directly responsible for the death of Mrs. Voorhees. So there's a little bit of a payoff to it. Whereas in the example that you gave with Alien 3, if I remember correctly, we just see them dead in their little sleep chambers, and we never see them. We never see what happens to them. They just died in their sleep or whatever. And that's incredibly unsatisfying because, like you said, we're totally invested in these characters, and then, oh yeah, by the way, they're dead. But at least we get to see.
There's a story element to this that wasn't present for the other one. You're right. That's a good point. This kind of expands the events instead of just we couldn't get the actors to come back or whatever circumstances caused Hicks and Newt to get killed off. That was almost like a throwaway act of desperation, whereas this is purposely propelling a story forward. That's a good point.
Yeah, I think that's the whole reason why they did it, is they had to kind of connect the events of part 1 to part 2, and you had to have that through line, and they're using Alice as that. And we don't know, what that through line is yet, but we just know, we know that Alice is part of it, but we don't know what the connection is just yet. So it's an interesting way to kind of kick things off. And it's also worth pointing out that we're practically 12 minutes into the movie and we haven't seen the credits yet. This is like a cold open of a movie that, again, I don't know how often this has been done before. I know James Bond has done it a lot, where you see like this, big action sequence and then the credits roll. But this is kind of a big deal to be, 12 minutes into the movie and, there's this huge sequence.
Yeah, pre-title sequence. Yeah. That some pretty significant things happen. This is no throwaway gag. This is an important thing where the character from the previous movie who we've been rooting for is bumped off pretty gruesomely. And then it finally cuts into some opening titles with a puzzling logo treatment.
With the first one, if I remember correctly, the words Friday the 13th crashed through glass and the glass shattered all over the place, and there wasn't really any reason for that other than just someone learning some cool special effect trick. And in this one, the Friday the 13th explodes, and then when it explodes, the rubble kind of reveals part 2.
Yeah, this like kind of metallic part 2. Yeah, the explosion is puzzling because we haven't seen.
It's not like Alice's house exploded or something after she was killed.
Right. Yeah, that's just. It's dramatic, but not really necessarily appropriate for the movie.
If there's one thing that you do not see in horror movies, it's typically a big explosion. So, it's weird, but it's certainly not going to be the weirdest title sequence that we see in this franchise.
That's a good point. So they run us through a few actor credits and stuff, but this chunk ends with the casting agents Simon and Kuman, who I think were primarily Broadway theater casting agents, and they pulled a lot of actors for these movies from the New York theater scene. Even Kevin Bacon came up through that. So I don't think they're still in business. I tried to look them up, and it doesn't appear that they're still around. But they did have some credits from back in the day. So that's where this part wraps up. Do you have any other details you wanted to point out?
I do not. No.
All right. Well, then the roll call of death is just Alice.
Yeah. Rest
Farewell.
in peace, Alice.
Yeah, we'll miss you. So thanks again for joining us. Come on back next time. Once again, this is Greg.
And I'm Brian.
And you're all doomed.
Yes, you are.